Good morning, Pastor Ed Kropa here from Hope Lutheran Church in Freehold, New Jersey, with a new week of Lenten devotions beginning on Monday, March the 8th, 2021. Our reading this morning is taken from Luke chapter 6, verses 46 to 49. Again, we're working through a Lenten devotional booklet written by Pastor Eric Burtness called Beyond Question, which deals with the questions that Jesus asked throughout the Gospels and how those same questions, the very same questions he asked of people in his day, especially his disciples, still pertain to us today and are still important for us to reflect on and consider in our own lives. So again, the reading this morning is from Luke 6, verses 46 to 49. Jesus said, "Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and do not do what I tell you? I will show you what someone is like who comes to me, hears my words, and acts on them. That one is like a man building a house who dug deeply and laid the foundation on a rock. When a flood arose, the river burst against that house but could not shake it because it had been well built. But the one who hears and does not act is like a man who built a house on the ground without a foundation. When the river burst against it, immediately it fell, and great was the ruin of that house." A couple thoughts before we turn to Pastor Burtness's book. A few years ago, we had a house built when I had a call in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and it was in a development, and these houses were being built basically on the side of a hill, a small, not quite a mountain, I guess, but it was pure rock. And in fact, they actually had to blast into the rock in order to get down to put in a foundation. But once they put that foundation into that solid rock, boy, it didn't move. We were up a little bit higher, and we'd get high winds and blizzards and things like that, and that house was just so solid. In fact, I remember they were building some other houses after we had already moved in, and they would come down and they'd say, we're blasting 3 doors down for a new house, and so you'll hear the siren or you'll hear the whistle, and that means that there's X amount of seconds before the blast, and sure enough, the whistle would go and you'd hear the ground shake. Didn't shake our house. Now, there was a house about 3 doors down, and they didn't like the idea of the foundation being set right into the rock, so they insisted that besides the topsoil that they put on top of the rock so that we could grow some grass, they insisted that, and they paid for it, presumably, all this extra layers of topsoil and earth because they wanted their house. They didn't want their house dug deep into the rock, into the mountain. Well, it wasn't but a couple of years that sand and dirt and so forth, topsoil began to shift back and forth, and unfortunately, although the people were warned and they insisted on it and paid for it, their foundation began to just buckle and crumble. While ours and the other houses around it, ours a couple 3 doors down, didn't move because the foundation was set right in the rock. And I think that's the image that Jesus is using here of having a solid foundation in the rock. But he likens it to the person. That foundation is the person who hears what he says and then does it, who acts on Jesus' words, on Jesus' commands. During the Civil War, one day General Lee, who of course was the commander of the Confederate Army, sent word to one of his generals, one of his famous generals, Stonewall Jackson, that the next time that he was riding in the direction of the headquarters, that Lee would be glad to see him on a matter of no great importance, was the words that were used. However, Jackson received that message and immediately prepared to leave the next morning. And rising very early, he rode 8 miles to Lee's headquarters against a storm of wind and snow, arrived just as Lee was finishing breakfast. Much surprised, Lee inquired why Jackson had come through such a storm. After all, he said it was a matter of no great importance. But General Jackson replied, "But you said that you wished to see me. And General Lee's slightest wish is a supreme command to me." So Jesus is talking here about acting on what he says. And do I always do that? Do we always do that? Pastor Burtness writes, Jesus' questions seem too probing, too intense, and there are just so many of them. Isn't it enough that the disciples call him Lord? Are they really also supposed to do everything he tells them to do? Isn't it enough to say we're Christians? Are we really supposed to follow Jesus too? That might be going a bit too far, he writes. Keep in mind that Jesus uses questions as a way to deepen our lives of discipleship. Jesus explains today's question in this way: someone who hears his words and acts on them is like a wise man who built his house on a foundation of solid rock. But a person who hears Jesus' words and doesn't act on them is like a foolish man who builds a house with no foundation. This connection between what we hear and what we do doesn't come naturally, he says, and goes against many of society's expectations. It goes against putting ourselves first and doing whatever we need to do to get ahead. It goes against telling white lies rather than speaking the truth. It goes against saying one thing and doing another. And yet it's clear that Jesus looks for us to not only say he is Lord, but to do what he says. He seeks consistency between our beliefs and our behavior, our convictions and our conduct, our values and our lifestyle. He calls us to live with integrity, a word that comes from the root to integrate. Integrity means integrating our beliefs and daily behaviors. Someone once said that integrity's overriding quality is wholeness. There's no discrepancy, in other words, between what a person of integrity appears to be on the outside and what he or she is on the inside. For the Christian specifically, integrity means we live according to what we say we believe. According to the Scriptures, it means we live by God's word and by God's direction. Integrity. In 1912, Leon Wood Bean started a small mail-order business in Greenwood, Maine, by selling a hunting boot with a money-back guarantee. However, defects in his design led to 90% of them being returned. Well, making good on that guarantee, of course, could have ruined his fledgling business, but Leon kept his word, corrected the design, and continued selling the boots. Well, today, LL Bean is one of the largest mail-order companies in the United States. It also has physical stores, because I remember traveling to Maine and stopping in on at one of them. Again, one of the largest in large part because it has continued that tradition of treating its customers with integrity. Integrity. The philosopher Francis Bacon once wrote, "It's not what men eat, but what they digest that makes them strong. It's not what we gain, but what we save that makes us rich. It's not what we read, but what we remember that makes us learned. Not what we preach, but what we practice that makes us Christians." Well, Pastor Burtness continues. Again, integrity means integrating our beliefs in daily behavior, he says. This isn't something you just slip into. Living with integrity is a decision. It's a daily commitment. Saying that Jesus is Lord and doing what he says means aligning our convictions with our conduct, what we believe with how we act every day. Now that's a solid foundation. Reporters and city officials once gathered at a Chicago railroad station on an afternoon in 1953. The person that they were waiting to meet was the 1952 Nobel Peace Prize winner. Well, a few minutes later, a train arrived, came to a stop, and this giant of a man, 6'4" with bushy hair and a large mustache, stepped from the train. Cameras flashed. City officials approached him with hands outstretched. Various people began telling him how honored they were to meet him. The man politely thanked them, and then, looking over their heads, he asked if he could be excused for just a moment. He quickly walked through the crowd until he reached the side of an elderly black woman who was struggling with 2 large suitcases. He picked up the bags and with a smile escorted the woman to her bus. And after helping her aboard, he wished her a safe journey. And as he returned to the greeting party, he apologized. "Sorry to have kept you waiting," he said. Well, that man was Dr. Albert Schweitzer, the famous missionary doctor who had spent his life helping the poor in Africa. In response to Schweitzer's action, one member of the reception committee said with great admiration to the reporter standing next to him, "That's the first time I ever saw a sermon walking." And we sometimes use the phrase of talking the talk. A lot of people can talk the talk, but can you walk the walk? Obviously, in that instance, that story showed that Albert Schweitzer could walk the walk. Do we act with integrity? Are our beliefs, are our actions consistent with our beliefs? I've seen this next story told in a variety of different ways, variety of different settings. It's basically the same thing, and it goes like this. One Sunday, pastor preached a sermon on honesty. Monday morning, he took the bus to go to his office, and he paid his fare, and the bus driver gave him back too much change. Well, during the rest of the journey, the pastor was rationalizing how God had provided him with some extra money that he kind of needed for the week, but he just could not live with himself. So before he got off the bus at his stop, he proceeded to give back the extra money. And he said to the driver, I think you made a mistake. You've given me too much change." And the driver smiled and he said, "There was no mistake. I was at your church yesterday and I heard you preach on honesty, and so I decided to put you to a test this morning." We call that integrity. It's what God calls for us to do. It's what Jesus calls for us to do, to not just say we believe, but to act out that belief in our actions and in our deeds. So the questions to ponder for today: what does it really mean to call Jesus your Lord? Do we just pay lip service? Or do we actually make that confession, internalize that confession in terms of how we live and act? And then it also asks, think about someone that you know who lives with great integrity. What could you learn from that person's example? Again, I think when we've been exposed to people with great integrity, it's obvious, it's impressive, because not everybody does that. Not all of us do it all the time, even if we strive for it. So when we encounter somebody with great integrity, it's noteworthy, and it's a reminder to us to strive to live that way ourselves. Well, let's close this morning with the prayer for today. Lord of all creation, you are the Lord of my life. Help me to hear and do what you say. Give me the courage and strength to match my words and my actions. Keep me close as I follow you. This I pray in Jesus' name. Well, I hope you had a restful weekend. I hope you have a great week. I hope it gets off to a great start this morning. And looking forward to being with you again, as always, tomorrow. Until then, take care.